Hello. Just as you said, sensory plays very vital role in terms of consumption of food and beverages. But today I will be just focusing mainly on beverages because that's a commodity which delivers the intended flavor and satisfaction far more than the food. And hence, in my small presentation, I would like to cover a little bit about sensory and particularly the emerging areas where we need to work more to capture the consumer mind. And also lead to proficiency validation because it's required. We are mostly trying to self-satisfy or self-certify ourselves in most of the area. What we do, but it's always good to validate by some regulatory authority or international bodies. Okay, can I have this one, please? Okay, so as we know that in analytical sciences, all the analyses are mostly precise and accurate, and they are always taken as it is presented. But in terms of sensory, it's often told that it is objective. It's subjective. So by doing this proficiency validation, we'll make sensory objective. And the idea of sensory is beyond quality assurance. So that we design a product which meets the consumer expectation. Then we also look for the troubleshooting when the process goes wrong. It helps a lot if we include sensory beside doing the precise chemical analysis. And most importantly, the product failure and the recall, which is very damaging, and it's a loss of revenue as well. I'll give some example end of this presentation on some of the critical recalls. I just have one or two data on that. Well, this is just an illustration of multi-modal perception of the flavor when the food or beverage is consumed. So we can see that the most important in the brain is the orbitofrontal cortex, where all the projections from the various senses are projected in that area, and it's quite interactive, and which also includes visual. So it's captured, and the first instance when you see the food or beverage, your decision is 90% taken, whether to go ahead or to refuse. So it's very, very critical while designing the project, any product, to keep total sensory in mind. So two points I wanted to emphasize, that beyond the 5 senses we always talk about, we have to look at what those senses they do in the brain, and which is very, very critical to understand if we're designing the product. Likewise, we always think that when we smell, we have, and our consumer, they discern based on the smell. But it's not really true, because unless the product is consumed and the interaction within the mouth takes place, and the molecules which vaporize inside the mouth is going inside and then goes to the epithelium. And also when you do the retronasal, the smell from outside is known as orthonasal. When we do along with tasting, it is known as retronasal. So it is known now, I'm talking on behalf of Flavor Active. Flavor Active, we have found that's very critical to go by retronasal tasting, and it is very, very powerful, and the consumers can discern far superior, and the testers can do the discerning judgment far superior than just smelling. A little bit about the methods also, because when we talk about the sensory, we have the consumer sensory, we also talk about the analytical sensory. But analytical sensory is very, very critical, and some of the emerging area, as I have shown here, these are well known. The sensitivity, the threshold, the discrimination and different test is a very, very popular, which by doing the duo or triangle test is very common to do that, or ranking. So these are the well-known testing which is incorporated in various ways depending on the foods, depending on the beverages. And this designing of the sensory experiment or sensory evaluation also plays very vital role where we are reaching, both in product designing and also in the quality assurance part of it. The new emerging sensory area is the temporal dominance of sensation, which is very, very important because when the food or beverage goes inside the mouth, it appears and then it goes down the throat. There's a lot of things happening. And also, and when you have the multiple flavors going in, and they study all those flavors together is a very complex matter. But nevertheless, it is being done very widely. And most of the food labs or beverage development labs, they are adopting very fast on that. And they are transferring similar kind of thing to on the consumer side also. So the classical way of doing hedonic like-dislike kind of thing is changing quite a lot now. And it is also published that the consumer, if the questions are asked properly, the question are made properly, and research is done properly, they can produce data far superior or at least equivalent to the expert testers. Now the sensory management, of course it involves, and most of you will know already, the panel selection and the training, and then followed by the effective training, ISO style training, all sort of thing. But what I want to emphasize that the training, level of training, what kind of training we are doing. So we have to do, because it is a practice thing. We have to practice, and then eventually lead to a very discerning sensory panel. Once you have it, you are able to perform all, whether it's a quality requirement or the product development requirement, very effectively. But the practice is required. You can see one of the illustration shows that if you are doing it regularly, yes, you're improving all the time. But the moment you drop in, you think that you know all the sensory, then the efficiency goes down. One very important or critical thing I would like to see, the flavor active does the flavors, but it does flavors only for training purposes, both positive and the negative. And the interesting thing about these flavors are you can taste it because it is done in a pharma environment, and it's safe to taste. So one can do retronasal testing, and all the flavor comes with icon, so it's very easy to recognize them and do the training, self-training, or recognize or structure training in all possible ways. They are very helpful. Now I come to proficiency validation. It's well known in the analytical sciences for many, many decades, but also Flavor Active provides that kind of validation online. It's a web-based validation program, and what is the gain here is actually once you have the validated panel, it's like calibrated instrument, and one can rely, one can certify, and ultimately it affects the quality of the product. This is the way it comes. It comes in a blind form, in a blister pack, which is it can be stored for a long time. And no code, it's a coded, but you wouldn't know what it is. And it's something like 4 rounds in a year. And once you have the enrollment, you can do with your various locations all the testing. And then it comes in these are the 3 kinds to choose from the validation. Whether it's a flavor identification or rank rating or intensity, or in profile, the total profile, whether it's acceptable, not acceptable, when you consider that entire profile with a multi-flavor kind of tasting. And the report generated on the web will look like this. You can have a look of the various locations, how your taste panel they are performing, and whether they need further training or they are doing fine. One can also view in that category or in that scheme, like if we have a juice scheme, so other juice companies, you can also see, but you wouldn't be able to know who is doing it. But you can always, you have a data. You can probably look at their data, how their panel behaving. So that also gives some impetus or motivation for you to improve. And these are 3-4 formats. It comes in a ready-made format, and you have to just do the prescribed method of tasting, and then enter the data, and then you will know whether you have done correctly or you didn't, and then it can transform in all kind of data. And these training, you can do self-training also if you can buy those flavors, but it's always advisable to get into a proficiency mode so that you have a third-party certification. Okay, some example. I just came across, the two examples I remember very well. Tesco, several years ago, released some juices, which is awful sulfury smelling kind of thing. And they had a major recall on that. And that was very damaging. And very recently, I came, because I come from the Esprit background, so I picked up on Esprit example. Bombay Sapphire is a very famous gin. It's sold in the market, labeled at 40%, but the actual strength was 77%. So I don't have to explain more what would have happened in the marketplace. They had to recall, and they went frantically collecting those 3,000, 4,000 bottles. I don't know how many they could manage, because once they release the market with this kind of thing, it can be very, very hazardous. I think I'm done. Thank you very much. If you have any question, I would be delighted to answer.